Okay. And there we go. So welcome everybody who's joining us. We'll get started in just a few minutes. So I know, Kristen, we were talking before, like with the rain, I'm expecting that it's going to rain because it's all cloudy and well, talk about humid, right?
Yeah.
So, but I haven't checked. Are we going to have a nice day tomorrow or no idea?
I thought we were supposed to, but
Yeah.
It seems like, where I'm at, I'm 2 miles from Delaware Bay. And so every time a big storm comes, it'll hit the Delaware Bay and just go around it. So I don't know, it'll show there's going to be some sort of storm coming, and inevitably it never actually happens, or it does a little bit and kind of keeps on going up the river.
Nice. Well, unless you need the rain, then it's not so nice, right? But yeah, here, right, where I'm at, there's so many trees all over the place. And when we've been having some of these crazy storms, power outages, trees all over, especially ash trees, it's just crazy.
My mom is still in she's still in Lebanon Township, and so she is almost always dealing with some kind of power outage from some kind of weather event.
Yep.
You've got to get a generator or something because
yeah, we did that after we learned, right? Obviously Hurricane Sandy, Storm Sandy, that was that. So okay, so I think we're going to get started. 7:01. People continue to join, but I want to be respectful of people's time and get going. So again, welcome everybody to, my goodness, August already. Where did the summer go? It's crazy, but it is the August Backyard Forestry online. So we're glad you're here. My name is Lori Jensen. I'm the executive director of the New Jersey Forestry Association. Just a few housekeeping, we'll go over that now. Feel free to stop by the chat to say hi at any time. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation, just put them in the Q&A. Kristen will answer them at the end. So at any time you think of something, just go ahead and put it in the Q&A for us. So here we are. Before we get going with the program, I just want to remind you, if you don't know already, that we do this every third Thursday of the month. So as far as upcoming programs, we, of course, are already working on September's program. So put that on your calendar. Again, it's every third Thursday of the month right here online. So if you are not a member of the Forestry Association, we would love to have you join. Very simple. You can just go to our website. You can either renew your membership right there, join as a new member, or even increase your level of support. It's all right there on the website. And member benefits, well, certainly this is one of them, right, that we're able to provide this program. We do offer newsletters. We've been starting to do some e-newsletters, which is kind of exciting. If you haven't gone to our website lately, I would suggest going over there and hanging out for a little bit. We've updated some content and we're pretty excited about that. We did just finally have a first in-person annual meeting this year after COVID. We're so excited. It was great to see everybody again. Woodland Stewards program actually happening this year in person, 3.5 days. So excited. So that's actually next month as well. If you want to learn more about that, by all means, just reach out to me. And we do a lot of representation of the woodland owners and just landowners in general. We're always checking things out for you and trying to keep on top of things for you, legislative monitoring and all that. So again, we'd love to have you join if you're not a member. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at any time. Okay, so you're here tonight, but did you miss some other backyard forestries in the past? Not to worry. We always pop them up on YouTube. We haven't put up July's yet, but we do. So feel free. That's the address on YouTube. So check us out over there and make sure you subscribe so we increase that number a little bit. So without further ado, Kristen, I'm so thrilled that you're here with us today. Kristen, Vice President of Stewardship with the New Jersey Audubon. And Kristen, I'll stop sharing my screen so you can start. All right.
Great. Yes. Thank you. And so welcome everybody, and thank you for having me. I'm going to get this going, but while I'm doing that, so as Lori mentioned, I'm Kristen Meistrell. I'm the Vice President of Stewardship with New Jersey Audubon. I stepped into that role about a year ago now, but I have been with New Jersey Audubon for 11 years now, which is kind of hard to imagine and hard to believe, but also, I've really gotten a chance to work with a lot of fantastic people, and I'm really excited to bring all of this information to you all tonight. So, talking about forest stewardship for the birds, right? So New Jersey Audubon, we are most notably known for our bird conservation, but we do quite a lot of different types of things. So first off, New Jersey Audubon, we are a nonprofit conservation organization. We are statewide, membership, donation, and grant funded. One thing to note is that we are actually not affiliated with National Audubon. That kind of gives us a really great opportunity to really focus and hone in on New Jersey and what New Jersey needs. But what makes New Jersey Audubon really, really unique and exciting is that we have a lot of different teams that are working across the state to connect all people with nature and to steward the nature of today for all people of tomorrow. So we have research and monitoring, education and outreach, public policy and advocacy, and then wildlife and habitat stewardship, which is what the department that I am in. So just a little bit more background on New Jersey Audubon. We, every 3 years, we create what we call the conservation priorities, which focuses on 3 main conceptual landscapes: forests, farms, and watersheds, coast and tidal wetlands, and cities and towns. And within that, we then describe different goals for people, habitat, species, and then diversity, equity, and inclusion. So within the Stewardship Department, we work to conserve wildlife and habitat through active management. We do that on both public and private lands throughout the state. And we actually have a handful of different teams that are working across across all of these different landscapes. So we have our forest health team, which is led by Ryan Haskell, our ag and wetlands team, which is led by Brittany Welch, urban ecosystems, which is led by Kelly Wenzel, and our New Jersey Audubon sanctuaries, which we have about 30 that cover 3,000 acres or so, that is led by Lindsay Gafford. So before I really dive into the habitat and wildlife connection with forests, I think it's important to really think about and look at what New Jersey's forests were previously, what they are now, and what we're anticipating they may become. So currently, we've got just shy of 2 million acres of forest. That's about 40% of all of New Jersey. And right, I think most of you all know, because you are here, you know that healthy forests provide a range of ecosystem services. They provide clean water, fuel, food, timber, habitat, soil formation, purifying air and water, carbon storage and sequestration, recreation, spirituality. Our forests really, really do a whole heck of a lot for us. And so it's really important that we make sure that we protect and conserve our forests. So if we take a look, take a look backwards. So, right, I won't go through every little bit of data in this table, but we're looking at before the 1700s, so before Europeans settled North America. This is sort of what our forests looked like in northern and southern New Jersey. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that prior to 1700s, there was a lot of time before that, right? Tens of thousands of years of our forests being shaped by a variety of different things. And so that's kind of one, why we get such a large range. Two, because it's very, where it's challenging to know exactly what our forests look like at that time. But then also our forests were constantly changing. And so this is just a couple screen grabs of different scientific papers that talk about how our forests were shaped, what they looked like before European settlement. And right, natural disturbances, fire and hurricanes were a major player in our forests. They really shaped our forests to kind of be what I showed in the last table. But the other thing that we often forget sometimes is that our forests were also managed by indigenous people. So in New Jersey, we had the Lenni Lenape people that were using our forests. They were living there. They were hunting and creating shelter. They were at times doing agriculture. And so all of these different factors really shaped the way that our forests evolved. So then, we flash forward to European settlement, 1700s, the Industrial Revolution, and New Jersey in the 1800s. So New Jersey was a massive hub for industry, A lot of industry started right here in New Jersey, which is part of what makes our culture and history so rich, but it also had some major implications. And so we were seeing a lot of our forests, almost all of our forests had been cleared at some point for industry, for settlements, and also just for fuel, So all of these industries were powered by wood for the most part. And so we really needed to use as much timber as we possibly could to power everything. And so then while we kind of move through history, once we get to the early 1900s, first, industry was largely unregulated at the time. And by the turn of the century, several industries in New Jersey had collapsed. Agriculture was starting to become abandoned, We were seeing a real shift in the way that our society moved and worked. And we also started to see a shift in society in terms of conservation and preservation. And so, because of the fact that industry was largely unregulated, there was the mindset of we have to protect it, which is critically important, We needed to protect our forests and our natural areas to make sure that it persisted into the future. And so then now, thinking about all of those different, different points in time, we then start to see our forests shift, So again, I won't go through each of these different types of all these numbers, but you can see that the current forests compared to the forests that were that made up New Jersey before the 1700s, there is a pretty big shift, We're seeing very little old growth, very little open or young forests, and very little pine savannas in southern New Jersey as compared to the 1700s and before. And so how do we know this? The U.S. Forest Service, they conduct the forest inventory and analysis on a regular basis. They have several different plots across the state where they're taking all of this inventory. And so this is how we know that about 2 million acres of New Jersey is forested. That forest is largely middle-aged. About 82% was the last number I saw. So largely middle-aged. It lacks diversity. It lacks diversity in age class, and it lacks structure. We also know that forests have remained relatively consistent since the 1970s. This is kind of across the board, there's going to be differences once you zoom in, but if you zoom out, our forests have remained relatively constant. And that's in part due to all of the regulatory regulatory aspects that we have in the state, and then also the huge push to preserve our land. And so, that was a vital part of making sure that our forests are protected. The other thing that's really interesting is that about half of New Jersey forests are privately owned. And so that's why it's so critically important that you all are here as forest owners to kind of see what you can do for your forests and what you can do for wildlife. So again, this is just a couple more graphs that show the age class distribution in New Jersey as of 2015. You can see that the area right in the middle is quite large, quite significant. And really what we'd like to see is this kind of flattened a little bit, We'd like to see more young forests and more old growth forests, and this kind of evenly distributed a little bit better. Another thing I like to point out is that the U.S. Forest Service also puts out these reports, these kind of quick snapshots, which are always really interesting to me, right? It kind of shows the different acreage that we have, how the land ownership is broken down. But then the one thing that I always think is interesting is what I called out here, and that's on an annual basis, right? The amount of forest that is being converted to non-forest and vice versa is relatively consistent, right? So that's how we get those numbers that I talked about before since the 1970s. We also see that on average, 7,000 acres of forest is disturbed by fire, and just shy of 9,000 acres are disturbed annually by weather events. And then just 2,000 acres of forest land is treated by cutting, so harvesting, thinning, anything like that. So now that we have, kind of the baseline and, the groundwork for New Jersey's forests, right, now I'm going to get a little bit into the connection between wildlife and habitat. And so, right, first we have to think about, what does wildlife need? The very basic minimum things that wildlife need is food, shelter, water, and places to raise their young, right? So this can vary widely from species to species. It could also vary widely from depending on where that wildlife or where that species is in its life history. And so there's a lot of different things that kind of shape the types of habitat we see, but natural succession is a pretty big driver. So succession disturbances, things like fire and hurricanes or storms, and also human disturbances kind of create this natural succession. So we see the disturbance, and then we see over time, we see some grasses and perennials coming in, some young forest, shrubs, young pines, that sort of thing. And then you get to your climax community, your mature oaks and hickories. And right, the other important thing to know is that this isn't necessarily a linear process, right? You can have a disturbance come in, it starts to regrow, and then you can have a disturbance again, or you can have this kind of happening at different stages in a given area at any given time. And so all of those different habitat types really help drive what our wildlife need. And so one of the big issues now is, as I mentioned, our forests are relatively middle-aged, right? And so the amount of species that we are providing habitat for is somewhat limited. And so, right, this is a pretty simplistic way to show all of this. But currently, the habitat that we're providing is really only providing habitat for a small amount of species. We are largely missing habitat for a whole wide variety of different species. And so that's kind of what we're paying attention to. This is very well described in the New Jersey State Wildlife Action Plan. You are more than welcome to read it, although it is several hundred pages long. But in the plan, it talks about how habitat loss is the top threat to wildlife in New Jersey. And so habitat loss could be both land conversion. So it could be, converting a forest to a development, or, converting a forest to a grassland, but it could also be loss of suitable habitat. So that means that it could be, habitat that, has invasive species in it now, or a habitat that went from young forest to old growth forest, or young forest to mature forest. And so, right, that kind of describes what some of the issues are. And within the Wildlife Action Plan, there's over 100 species that are listed as, our top and most vulnerable species. And so then, right, this is just a random page that is taken out of the Wildlife Action Plan. All of the species that are highlighted in yellow, those are species that need some sort of young habitat at some point in their life. So it could be young forest, scrub, shrub, or grasslands. And so right off the bat, you can kind of see there's a lot of species that require that type of habitat. And so this is kind of where we're seeing some of the, some of the disconnect and some of the challenges with our wildlife. Now, on top of all of this, right, we have additional threats to our natural resources. We have fragmentation and development, invasive species, insect and disease. We have overabundant white-tailed deer in certain areas. We have issues with fire suppression, declining species, that declining diversity, and then climate change, which just accelerates and, really makes all of these threats that much worse. And so, one of the biggest headlines that caught a lot of our attention was in 2019. A report was put out by Cornell University that stated just shy of 3 billion birds have been lost since the 1970s, and so that is a really significant decline over a fairly short amount of time. And this is just North America, and so, quite frankly, right, we need to be doing a much better job at protecting our natural resources. The other thing to note is eastern forest birds have declined by 17%. And so the fact that, we're seeing some major declines right in our own backyard is cause for concern. And so then I'm going to go through just a couple kind of specific case studies. So, right, some of the species that are declining, the wood thrush, the eastern towhee, and the prairie warbler, these are all species that have different types of habitat that they need for nesting. So wood thrush nests in trees that are enclosed canopy forests. Eastern towhees nest on the ground in open forests with a very dense shrub layer. And prairie warblers nest in shrubs in more open scrub meadows. But one of the things that they all have in common is that they nest in New Jersey's forests. And so we know from data since the 1980s from breeding bird surveys that these species have declined over the last several decades. And so, right, we're seeing some pretty sharp declines in the 90s. It's kind of bottoming out, during the last several years, but a decline nonetheless. And so the first thing that you might think of is, okay, perhaps it is development, right? Where maybe we're seeing a lot of forests converting into development or shopping malls or parking lots, But again, right, when we look at our land use, forest cover has stayed relatively constant. And so, that kind of shows, okay, maybe there's something a little bit deeper that's happening. Young forest habitat, when we overlay that with the species data, we see a pretty significant correlation, right? We see that young forests declined pretty rapidly in the 90s, just about the same time that these species all started to decline as well. And so that starts to kind of paint the picture a little bit more of maybe what's going on with our forests. Here's some other studies, right? There are multiple studies that have been looking at this, but we're starting to learn more and more that species may need very different habitats throughout their life cycle. So more often, we're looking at, whether or not birds nest in a certain area. So we tend to put a lot of weight on what their nesting habitat looks like. But then that means that we are forgetting all of the other pieces of their life cycle. And so this study in particular was one that was done in New Hampshire, and it took a look at mature nesting birds, birds that prefer to nest in mature closed canopy forests, and whether or not they prefer either unmanaged forests, wildlife openings, which is kind of very select thinning, or clear cuts. So clear cuts being a silviculture practice that is designed to let forests regenerate. And so they took a look after all of the chicks had fledged. And while not every single species was found in these forest openings, some of the areas like many of the species really they preferred kind of the clear cuts or the wildlife openings. So red-eyed vireo was found more often in clear cuts. Yellow rump warbler was found in these wildlife openings, and so on and so forth. And so that kind of starts to give us even more insight into what's going on with our wildlife, that they need a wide variety of different types of habitat throughout their life cycle. And so, right, that means that when we're thinking about wildlife habitat, particularly in our forests, what we're really looking for is to create a mosaic of habitat. So we want species to be able to live and thrive in a forest type and be able to access all different types of habitat throughout their life cycle. So we'd like to, maybe have an area that looks like this, that is perhaps very close to an area that looks like this. In southern New Jersey, perhaps we'd like to have some areas that look a little more like this, have some areas that are more traditionally old growth habitat, right? And with some openings here, and also having some areas that are closed canopy, right? So the goal is to have as much different types of habitat across a landscape as possible. And so, right, that's a whole lot of kind of depressing data, right? Talking about 3 billion birds lost and, all of the threats that we're seeing in our, in our forests and our natural systems. But one of the things that we can do is use forest stewardship to help address some of these concerns. So the benefits of a forest stewardship plan include increased resiliency. So you're increasing the health of your forests, which kind of create a stronger, healthier forest that is more resilient against things like wildfire, disease, and pests. You're, potentially increasing your water, air purification and your carbon sequestration. You're increasing structural diversity, right? So creating an understory and a shrub layer, increasing habitat diversity, and then also forest stewardship plans can also consider natural, cultural, and historic resources, and they can create sustainable wood products. So one of the first steps that I like to always think about when designing a forest stewardship plan or a wildlife habitat plan is first, think about your goals, think about what it is that you would like to see your forest be, and what you would like, what you like to do on your property. What are some of the things that you enjoy? What are some of the things that you would like to see more of? So once you come up with your goals, the next thing is to look at where you fit within the overall landscape. And so here, this is just a screenshot from a really great tool called New Jersey GeoWeb. This is an online mapping tool that you can use. And here I've got the connecting habitat across New Jersey. This is just one of the layers that you can explore while you're in this tool. But this, so this essentially shows, the green is where you have some core habitat, and then the kind of yellowish, beige, brownish colors are where you have connecting habitat. So you might be able to take a look at whether or not your property is within a core habitat area, whether it's in a connecting habitat area, and that can help you really determine kind of what you want to do and how you want to manage your property. You can also take a look at what types of species are present in the, across the landscape, and just sort of, what is going on at the landscape level. So then once you do that, there are a couple different techniques that you can use to create these different types of habitats. So there are silvicultural practices, going in and harvesting or cutting trees. So in silvicultural terms, you could be looking at clear cutting, which is removing all of the trees to help regenerate that, regenerate naturally. So really releasing all of the seeds to germinate into a more young forest. You could also be looking at things like seed tree or shelter wood, which is retaining some of the mature trees, or you can do single tree selecting or select thinning. And so each one of these types of silvicultural practices is going to get you a different result, right? So each one of these has slightly different light regimes. There's slightly different structures that you're going to create. And so, a clear cut will create more of a young forest habitat, whereas a single tree selection may help promote old growth forest. Some of the other things that you want to be thinking about is structural complexity. So whether or not you have different types of layers throughout your forest, whether or not you have regeneration, natural regeneration, woody debris, leaf litter, canopy gaps, right? Creating that structural diversity is what's going to get you the most bang for your buck and give you, give you that habitat diversity that wildlife really need. Some of the other things that you could be looking at is retaining snags or dead standing trees, and also retaining woody debris. So this is going to create some really good habitat for species like the red-headed woodpecker, which nest in old snags and cavities, but also forage, forage in these areas as well. Another thing that you're going to want to do is really think about invasive species control. So particularly with plants, right, you're really going to want to try and mitigate invasive species the best that you can. And also if you're in an area that has a very high deer density, you will probably want to consider some sort of deer management plan if natural regeneration is part of your goals. So just a couple more things to consider. You can use prescribed fire as a management tool as well. And so there's actually, again, different types of prescribed fire. You can do it during the dormant season, or you can do it during the growing season. Both of those are going to result in two very different end results. But it's a really great and natural way to kind of help manage your forest. And in some areas, particularly in the pine barrens, fire is necessary to regenerate species like pitch pine. The other thing you want to think about is diversity of native plants. And so, right, you want to think about plants that provide food resources for wildlife throughout the entire cycle of their life. And so you want to be looking at things like eastern red cedar that have berries that that birds and other wildlife can be eating directly. You can have oaks, which produce acorns, which are really great for wildlife habitat. But oaks are also another great species that provide host plant resources for over 500 species of butterfly or moths. So that's kind of a secondary food type. So, the oaks are feeding the moths and the butterflies and the caterpillars are feeding other wildlife like birds. And then finally, you also want to think about different flowering plants. So shrubs that flower at different times of the year, like this shad bush, which flowers very early on, providing some resources for pollinators, which in turn provide food resources for other wildlife. You can also be thinking about water features. So you can either identify areas where there are some water features. So if you have vernal pools on your property, you can be looking at that. You can also be doing more, more intense hydrology restoration. So this picture here is installing step pools in an old agricultural ditch to help kind of slow down some of the flow of water, decrease erosion, and create some good habitat. So you can be doing kind of a couple different things with water features. And really, again, the goal is to try and make as much of different types of habitat as you possibly can. So that was a whole lot of different options or things that you could do. So, right, the question is, does forest stewardship actually work, right? So have we been able to do this, and have we been able to see actual wildlife increases? And so here's a picture of a forest that was located in Sparta Mountain up in Sussex County. So one of the issues here is that you can see there's very, very little light that's reaching the forest floor. There's very little structural diversity. So you're not seeing a lot of shrubs. You're not seeing any of those herbaceous layers. Part of that is due to the fact that there isn't a whole lot of light, but you can also see that all of the trees are growing really close together in some areas. They may not be as strong or resilient. And really, even though this does provide habitat for some species, it's not providing a lot of habitat for a wide range of species. And so one of the management prescriptions for this was to do something like this. So this is a seed tree cut that was done several years ago. This was part of an approved forest stewardship plan for the property. And then over time, after a couple of years, the same area ended up regenerating into this, which is exactly what we were hoping for, right? We're hoping for kind of some areas with down woody debris. We're hoping for areas of natural regeneration, so different layers of species, different tree species. We're seeing some areas with canopy. The canopy layer is strong, but then there's also a really strong shrub layer. And so we saw exactly what we were hoping for in terms of the vegetation response, but we also saw a really strong response to the wildlife. So in 2020, we actually had observed a golden wing warbler that was staging and calling in one of the managed sites that we had on Sparta Mountain. So this is one of the species that we were managing for. And so after several years, eventually the golden wing warblers did move in. And so that was a really, really exciting sign that we had, and that, the management prescriptions were working. The other thing, and this is a screen grab from the New Jersey DEP website, but DEP biologists and New Jersey Audubon biologists also have been doing breeding bird surveys at Sparta Mountain for the last several years. And so you can see just how dramatic the increase is before harvest, only 3 months after harvest, and then it steadily climbs as we get to year 4. And so we're seeing increases in bird species, specifically species of concern. And some of the more notable species that we've documented at these sites are eastern whippoorwill, least flycatcher, and red-shouldered hawk, which are all species that are declining. So, right, that's a lot of information. There's a lot of things to be thinking about and considering. So the good news is that New Jersey Audubon does offer some conservation assistance for private landowners. So we, depending on our availability and our schedules, we'll be able to do a site visit with you if you're interested. We can visit your site, provide some assessments, and then ultimately give you a trip report and recommendations for your property. We can help connect you with some other resources, or connect you with partners. So we have a very strong working relationship with the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is a great program for private landowners looking to do this type of work. And depending on our schedules, our resources, we could also assist with conservation plan development and at times implementation. And so here are just a couple of resources that you can use. The first is New Jersey Audubon's website. On our stewardship page, we actually have some fact sheets for forest stewardship that you can take a look at. The NRCS website in New Jersey has some really great information about different programs, but you can also contact New Jersey Audubon, any one of our staff, to kind of help guide you through the NRCS and USDA application processes. And another great resource is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, their Partners for Fish and Wildlife program, which provide kind of technical resources. They provide permitting assistance, and then they can also provide some actual habitat management on the ground. And so with that, here is our contact information. So I put all of the folks I mentioned that are leading teams within the Stewardship Department. There's my contact info: Ryan Haskell, Brittany Welch, Lindsay Gafford, and Kelly Wenzel. So I will leave this up for a couple minutes. I'm sure we'll be able to share all of this. But with that, I think it is time for Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kristen. It's great that you're going to leave this slide up too, so people can take a look at this and maybe copy down some numbers. The other thing is like, I probably didn't say at the beginning, or yeah, I guess I did. We are recording this, so we will make sure that everybody gets copies of this. So, all right, let's get into some of the questions. So at the beginning, this was a good question too, and of course, Audubon is statewide. So how can suburbs contribute to wildlife habitat? I have some answers, I think, but I'd love to hear what you have to say about that. And Richard asked that question.
Yeah, great. So absolutely, suburbs and urban areas can contribute to wildlife habitat. We actually have a program called Garden for Wildlife, which is connected to the National Wildlife Federation, their Garden for Wildlife certifications. And so, right, if you have a small area, even if it's, half an acre, quarter acre, what you can do is you can take a look at the 4 things that wildlife needs. So food, shelter, water, and places to raise young. And if you can add that in small spaces, so that could be, the food resources could be just as simple as bird feeders, right? In wintertime, you could also have native plants, which is considered a food source. Bird baths are really great, for small spaces, which, provide water resources, especially, you have to make sure that it's cleaned out and you change the water regularly, but that's a great, a great addition to backyard habitat. For small spaces, you can also just put in bird boxes, right, for places to raise young. So that'll give some species like chickadees places to raise young. And then, and then shelter. That's really, anything that includes some shrub areas. So you can create a garden that has some shrubs, has some herbaceous plants, some grasses, and all of that contributes to wildlife habitat and can really, really make a huge difference, especially in a small space.
Kristen, do you have any examples of some successes in some urban areas?
Yes.
I know Newark has a lot of, when I went to college there, they have a lot of really cool community garden and just like even spaces where they put in a lot of native plants and things like that. Anything else that comes to mind?
Yeah, so I actually just recently visited I think it's Rahway Riverside Park. And so that was a project that was Covanta and some community organizations created a backyard small urban garden. They installed it last year, and I got to say it looks incredible for just being a year old. So that's one example. There's another one in Camden that I think Covanta also worked on with community leaders within Camden. And so there's several different options that you can see. Another really great one is Linden Hawkeye. So that is a project that New Jersey Audubon works with the city of Linden, but it is a small forest, small urban forest area with some really great trails. There is, some wetlands there, so definitely check that out as well.
Oh, excellent. Thank you for that. That's great. That's great. So I'm going to skip just another question that actually Richard asked, and I think it kind of ties in a little bit, talking about advising. Can New Jersey Audubon advise counties and towns, or is it just landowners?
Yep. So we advise private landowners. We work with counties. We work with townships. We work with state entities as well. So we will work with the DEP to do wildlife habitat on wildlife management areas or parks and forest land. So yeah, we work with all public and private landowners.
Wonderful. Okay. Couple questions that came in on the Sparta Mountain. It's funny because I wrote this down too, about the before, during, and after photos. Incredible. So Peter was wondering, what about deer browsing? Like, how did that beautiful regeneration happen? How did it survive deer browsing?
Yeah, so I'm really glad that you asked that question because so I had mentioned about deer management if you have a deer problem. And so, right, the deer population in New Jersey is not consistent across the board. So we have really high densities of deer in places like Mercer County, but we have less densities of deer in places like Sussex County, parts of Warren, parts of Passaic. Part of that just has to do with the fact that there is a lot of habitat available, right? There's a lot of forest land available, and deer really like that edge habitat. So you find them more so in these suburban forest landscapes. So one, Sparta Mountain really didn't have a lot of deer browse. The other thing with with forest stewardship is that there is a threshold, right? So the larger the area that you're looking at, to harvest, you actually kind of tip this threshold when deer don't really affect the area. So I forget exactly what that number is, but the larger the area that is naturally regenerating, if you don't have massive amounts of deer, then you actually kind of have that nice balance between, the deer will come in, they will browse it, but it's not going to be so much that it's overwhelming and stops the deer. The other thing too, I'll say is, I had recently seen some studies that came out that talked about natural regeneration and how deer aren't always the end all be all with with the regeneration not happening. At times, it can also be light availability.
Okay. Well, you mentioned earlier about the canopy, that first picture, or one of those first pictures, so that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So one other hopefully final question on, not final, but about Sparta Mountain, so we can, because there's some other ones that I wanted to mention. So Styra was talking about the clear cutting at Sparta Mountain came under a lot of criticism, but so tell us about how you feel that it was successful. I think the pictures say it, but she also noticed that the species growth diminished after year 5, right? You had that curve and then it started to just a little bit. Was that expected? Is that what you expected? Okay.
Yeah. So that, so that is expected, right? So if you kind of think back to that linear graph that I showed of the succession, right? So, over time, things will start to grow up, they'll start to change. And so, right, there's kind of that sweet spot for wildlife. Really the idea then for places like Sparta Mountain, or places, that have that wildlife component, is to kind of then go back to areas, maybe reset succession again, kind of have different areas that are at varying levels of, of their age within the forest block. So, right, having a little bit of everything. And so for early successional species like golden wing warbler and other species, right, there's that kind of sweet spot in 4, 5, 6-year-old forests that seem to really, really thrive. So that is expected, but at the same time, that means that we're kind of seeing exactly what we're hoping for. And that just means that we're going to have to go back and think about what the next step is. Do we go back to some of the cuts that we have had and go in and treat that again, or kind of reset succession again? So then the other question about Sparta Mountain and whether or not, we felt, how we felt success-wise. So yes, Sparta Mountain did come under a lot of criticism. I think, there's a lot of different probably reasons behind the criticism. I think, first of all, it's quite a stark change when you first see some of the treatments. The immediately after can be a little bit jarring. And so, right, one of the things that I always like to say is, habitat restoration takes a lot of time. So we have to be very, very patient. One of the things that, I think is really interesting and good about Sparta Mountain is that when you take a look at the landscape, right, you take a look at Sparta Mountain as a whole, it's roughly 3,000 acres. And so over time, just about 3% of the forest will be cleared at any given time throughout the life cycle of the forest stewardship plan. So to me, that's just saying we've got a lot of different types of habitat, right? Some of the forest is remaining, so we're making sure that some of that area is staying the way that it is and kind of working through its own natural succession, but that we're helping some other areas along. And so just the fact that we've seen, such great regeneration, and then also the wildlife response, has really showed us that the Sparta Mountain project was successful.
Fantastic. Great. So next question, onto another great topic is, so Norm wanted to know, are there particular trees that you recommend that will support threatened bird species? And I just wanted to put a plug in here because you mentioned oak, right? And yeah. The first thing that I thought of is Dr. Talmy, right? And his work and his books and stuff. And you mentioned the number of species. So oak, go oak. It's all great. Yeah. But so to Norm's question, are there particular species that you would recommend that would support threatened bird species?
Yeah. So, I mean, oak kind of goes without question, right? Without saying. I mean, oak is I think has the most amount of, is a host plant for the most amount of butterfly and moth species. Mm-hmm. So really, like, that is for sure a top contender. We'll also say things like hickory is a really good tree species. And then, right, so Doug Talmy, he did work on with National Wildlife Federation. They have their native plant finder, which actually helps you take a look. You can put in your zip code and see the species ranked by how many butterfly and moth species they support. Mm-hmm. So for trees, I think black cherry is a species that supports a lot of different diversity. I think any of the willows really support a large amount of species. But then also, right, things like shadbush, things like chokeberry, any of those shrubs that kind of flower at different times, those are going to be really, really important. They also provide some, nesting habitat for species. So, those are some of the top ones I can think of. But it also kind of depends on where you are, right? If you're in northwestern New Jersey, the species may be a little different than if you were in the Pine Barrens.
Yeah. And I think that's why it's great you mentioned that native plant finder, right? Yeah. That so you can put in your area and it'll pull up the plants. So I will link that when I put together the resources for this one and send it out to attendees. I will put a link to that. So that might help as well. Okay. Okay. So Joanne was just asking a little bit about pesticides, and especially the daytime mosquito treatments. Do they affect pollinators and birds, and how does that all work? Is that something we need to be concerned about?
Yeah, so I think, pesticides and herbicides are one of those tricky, it's tricky, right? So we, as land managers, do use herbicides at times. That's to help kind of reduce invasive species, in particular, invasive plants. Oftentimes that's kind of the only solution that we have to mitigating invasive plants. I think overall, right, kind of broad use of herbicides and pesticides can be concerning. So, right, if you're thinking about spraying your lawn, right, there are potentially other natural solutions that you can be using. So for mosquito control, right, there are just kind of taking a look at your property and seeing if there's breeding habitat. Mosquitoes can breed in the very tiniest of puddles. And so making sure that there's no standing water, in kind of being okay with a lawn that has, lots of weeds in it, maybe, not a perfectly sodded lawn. So I think kind of the mass broad spectrum of herbicides that we see can certainly be a cause for concern.
Yeah, that lawn you mentioned, that's mine. And I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
So a couple little questions about forest stewardship. So Karen wants to know, what's the minimum property size for a stewardship plan?
Yeah, so I believe the minimum is 5 acres in New Jersey. So that is the forest stewardship plan that is approved by the state of New Jersey. If you are going through something like the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, they don't have a minimum acreage size. The only thing that you need to meet some eligibility requirements, right? So you need to have your property listed in the Farm Service Agency. You have to, be below a certain annual gross income level. Like there's a couple eligibility questions, but overall, that's open to most landowners. And then U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, their partners program, also doesn't have a threshold. Really, they're just looking at whether or not you are supporting federal trust species.
There you go. And I would be remiss if I didn't say check with your consulting forester or find a consulting forester, and they can help you with certainly the stewardship plan, and then NRCS, right? We should probably put a link to, I'll add a link to that, to the response too. So that's great, great information. And so Charles's question was sort of on the same line about they're thinking of moving from a USDA forest management plan to the stewardship plan, and thoughts on that, and is it similar to what you're suggesting? So if you want to address that, or you want me to just have consulting forester answer that, that's up to you, Kristen.
Yeah, I mean, I will always encourage someone to move into a forest stewardship plan. I think you can achieve very similar results with a forest management plan, right? So it kind of depends on a lot of different factors. But forest stewardship plan is always going to take a look at far more resources, including natural and cultural resources. And then I also do know that USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service does offer funding that you can convert your management plan to a stewardship plan.
Yep. Well said. Very good. Yep. Excellent. Okay. So Norm is asking about a specific property in Millville, Holly Farm. Are you familiar with Holly Farm?
I am familiar.
I bet you are. So he wanted to know if the habitat change there has the desired effect in attracting grassland birds.
Yeah. So I can't answer that just because, because I haven't really seen the before and after, any of the data, but, what I can say is that, I've walked through that area, and I do see, right, anecdotally, I see a lot of different species there. And so I can only imagine that it is, it is an improvement. Great.
Okay. So Norm, thanks. Because I think he's from that area. So that was a great question. That's another one I'm going to have to look up to see what some pictures on that. So that's terrific. So I think that's it. If anybody else has any questions, pop them in the Q&A now. But so Clark was asking early on, the very first slide, I know it was a long time ago that we posted that very first slide. So he was asking what bird species that was. So I figured maybe if you can go back to that slide, but before you say, if anybody wants to take a guess, we'll see if we have any, I don't know, bird nerds on.
Okay, hold on.
First slide. I think you're
very first slide.
Very first slide. This was a long time ago.
Yes. Okay.
Let's see if anybody can guess.
Going back. A lot of info.
Yeah, right.
There you go.
This was your recap, people.
Yes.
So right there.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any guesses? Put it in either the chat or the Q&A. Going once. Oh, wait a minute. We have a guess. So Nessa, can you see that in the chat?
I can. Yep.
What do you think?
Oh, so they are. I'll give it a couple seconds.
Oh no, are they not right?
No, they're right.
Okay.
Yeah, so black-throated blue warbler.
There you go. Okay, that's great.
Yep.
You guys did great. All right, I think we're done unless there's any other questions. This was fantastic. Hopefully you can see some of the conversation in the chat, because Just what a great, fantastic presentation. So you're getting a thumbs up and everything.
Perfect.
So
thank you.
Really appreciate your time tonight. Thankful for everybody that participated. We will put some resources out for you on this, and then obviously the recording as well. And we hope that we'll see you again next month. So thank you. I hope everybody has a wonderful evening. Kristen, thank you so much, and we'll talk again soon.
Great. Thank
All
you.
right. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.